Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Beneath the Surface, where we discuss political, social and Islamic affairs taking place around the world. Today we'll be discussing divide and rule. Joining us in the studio today is a priest from the Church of England and cultural critic and commentator, Frank Galli. Thank you very much for being with us today. Let's start off with, what does divide and rule mean?
Divide and rule is a maxim from politics, especially from imperial politics. It says basically that in order to control a people, a nation, a culture, you have to divide it, to break it into pieces, and so you weaken it. And very often you play some of the pieces against each other. So you divide first what you've got, what you seek to dominate, and you sometimes play the pieces you've broken up against each other. So they cannot actually unite, combine against the oppressor, but in fact they can be easily controlled, captured if you like, and eventually subjugated. And so the empire consolidates its hold. It's a game we've seen played innumerable times. It goes back to, well, I suppose it goes back to the beginning of history, but the Roman emperors, the Roman Caesars, were past masters at divide and rule. And the first ancient Roman who came to this country, Julius Caesar, found himself confronted with a number of tribes. And what he did very cleverly, he allied himself with some tribes. He got these tribes to fight other tribes. He played on rivalries. He played on antagonists. I mean, Caesar was only here for a couple, less than 2 years. But certainly in Gaul, which is now France, he played that game a great deal. But it's the logic of empire. It's just a tool to rule, dominate, and assert your power.
Do we see divide and rule today?
Divide and rule is alive and kicking today. If we look at what some Western powers have done in the Middle East, we can see it in reality. I mean, first of all, the Middle East is really a creation of Britain and France, a modern Middle East today. Prior to that, it was the Ottomans, and the Ottomans too did practice this maxim. But certainly, if we go back to the collapse of the Ottoman Empire during the First World War, there was an agreement between France and England, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which was really for carving up the Middle East into spheres of influence. And the Arabs were, some of them were very keen on shaking off Ottoman rule, which very often was quite oppressive. The Arabs were offered an independence, an Arab kingdom. Sharif Hussein of Mecca was offered that, and the Arabs rose up and fought for the British. But, of course, what happened, first of all, the French and the British had already decided what they wanted to do. Secondly, in 1917, the infamous Balfour Declaration, in a way, also torpedoed the Sykes-Picot Agreement, because then the Jews were offered, were promised by Britain, a national home in Palestine. National home was a euphemism for a state. And of course, that was completely against even the spirit of Sykes-Picot Agreement, because Amir Hussein of Mecca, or Sharif Hussein, had not been told what Britain intended to do. And here we're going to bring in also particularly sort of notorious character. We're talking about T.E. Lawrence, so-called Lawrence of Arabia, who was the agent, a British agent in the Middle East, who acted as a liaison officer between the British and Sharif Hussein of Mecca, and also Faisal, his son. Um, and Lawrence was a contradictory figure because in a way, certainly I believe personally that he liked the Arabs and he was fond of the Arabs, but at the same time he was first and foremost a British agent. And at some stage he did believe that his country was giving the Arabs a state independence. But of course, he had to realize very quickly that was not the case. And so he was left, he should have told Hussein, and especially Faisal at the time, that he was being cheated, but he could not do it. However, I have to say, later on, Lawrence refused a special award which the King of England, George V, wanted to give him, exactly because his conscience prevented him from it. So we have here this game of first carving up the Middle East. Secondly, we're offering large chunks of the Middle East to Jews, and then playing an ambiguous, contradictory role. Whether it was totally conscious, I don't know. I think it was a big sort of muck-up. It was a big... but Britain really objectively made promises to different political actors which could not be honoured once at the same time. They just couldn't. And so today we see the consequences. We see a Middle East which is the boundaries of many Middle East states are artificial. They do not take consideration of the reality of what they are, the cultures, the tribes on the ground. And we have all this coming home to roost. And both the British and the French bear heavy responsibility.
So you mentioned that France and the United Kingdom were interested and they were kind of ruling the Middle East. Are they not still doing that today, or are there more countries involved?
Well, technically we are told that colonialism is over. We are told that imperialism is no more. We are told that we believe of a state. But there are different, more subtle forms of domination, oppression today. They are economic, they are financial. They are, well, we know there are some tensions in the Middle East. There are some religious tensions, there are ethnic tensions, there are cultural tensions. Now, certainly, and the three-letter word oil, unholy oil, is one of the paramount considerations. I wonder whether, in fact, Britain would have been so keen, even America, so keen on intervening in Iraq, had it not been that this new entity which is coming up, Khilafah or ISIS, call it what you will, was not getting very close to the oil wells, and in a way sort of put the wind up the west, so to speak, because oil is so important. And also the sort of sordid alliance which the Americans and the British have conducted with Saudi Arabia now for years. And the British royal family, I have to say, has close links with the Saudi royal family. Prince Charles, we've seen him waving a sword during a famous sword dance. I quite like the sword dancing myself, actually, as mere sort of spectacle. But I mean, Prince Charles quite clearly is British royal family has close links with the Saudis, and even in Qatar, the Emir of Qatar, I know he stepped down. He went to Sandhurst Military Academy. I've seen a photograph of Prince Charles passing a review, Sheikh Hamad. So there are all sorts of connections and vested interests which are at play there.
But what causes them to use the divide and rule?
Well, power, in a way, is in a simple answer. It is all about power. Now, power is a category of politics. You can't have politics without power. But power can be used or misused. Power should be, and we are told, people swear up and down, all the rulers, that it is in the interest of of the people, that it is improved to better the condition of the people and all that. But when it is actually power is used cynically to sow discord, to cause mayhem, and to divide and poison the atmosphere or culture of a country, then it becomes despicable. I mean, if we go back actually to the First World War, there was a man called President Wilson, the American president, who put forward 14 points. It was supposed to be the beginning of a new international politics. No more war, no more aggression, but it was all based on self-determination of peoples. It was meant to be no more sort of treaties, no more carving up of countries. It was the new dawn. Unfortunately, President Wilson forgot a maxim which the great Realpolitiker, the philosopher Thomas Hobbes, said, that covenants, meaning treaties, without the sword are but words. Namely, President Wilson did not provide the backup in order to have all these 14 points implemented. The whole thing collapsed. It was a chance. He was an idealist, but he failed. So today we have, on the face of it, we have a great deal of, Western politicians, statesmen, fill their mouths with high-sounding phrases and declamations. The reality we see is completely different. I mean, Tony Blair, to make the most notorious case, I mean, he still goes around, calls himself the ambassador for the quartet, and the man has got blood on his hands.
But the West has also always been known to be very powerful. Like, everyone speaks of the United States, for example, as the most powerful country in the world, and the same about the UK. Why do they continue to use divide and rule if they've already got that power that you spoke of?
Yes, I don't want to be totally Manichaean or dualistic. I believe there are Western leaders who have good intentions. They mean well, but they're also very powerful interests which, at the end of the day, take priority. And so it's not necessarily, it's naive to put it down just merely to evil motives. Of course, there are people who have bad evil motivation, but it's also a matter of really not being strong enough and consistent and coherent enough to follow up one's principles. I remember Jack Straw, who was Labour Foreign Secretary years back. He did acknowledge that the mess in the Middle East was partly the result of both Sykes-Picot and the Balfour Declaration. He did acknowledge that it was something pretty shameful, but he didn't really have the courage to do something about it. I mean, for example, to force Israel to come to the negotiating table and really give to the Palestinians their rights and giving up the settlements and so on. It couldn't do it, partly because he was weak, partly because he was, well, I don't want to get too personal with this. I mean, he could shifted President Obama. I think President Obama, I know this is the next, sometimes when I look at President Obama's body language when he talks to Netanyahu, it's quite clear Obama doesn't like Netanyahu. But he can't actually do anything because the American Senate and Congress would make trouble for Obama. The president is not actually all-powerful. So it's a combination of weakness, a combination of self-interest, a combination of realpolitik. At the end of the day, it's sort of, it's not ideals, but it's self-interest, or what is perceived as self-interest, which take precedence over justice, over high-minded principles.
With the Middle East, was there always a sectarian tension, or was it just part of a plan, do you think?
I think both. The problem with a plan is that in a way, sometimes talking of a plan, it sort of overrates the intelligence and the craftiness of some people. Very often it's, the great German theorist of war von Clausewitz said that very often in war, nobody knows what's going on. It's just a mess, it's just chaos. So, if you like, war is the continuation of politics by other means. Famous definition by Clausewitz. So politics very often is a mess as well. So there is a plan, but it's not some sort of highly structured. There is an idea, but sorry, you said a plan, or what was the other alternative?
Or was it there always a sectarian tension in the Middle East?
Sectarian, we said.
Yes, mainly.
I think sectarian realities do exist. The question is, to what extent are they exacerbated? I met some time ago an Iraqi guy, and he said, well, maybe this is not something many Muslims would like, but said, my father never prayed. He was a communist, I think. So the idea, and he said, I didn't know whether I was Sunni or Shia. So I'm not praising someone who doesn't pray. All I'm saying is that there was in Iraq, for example, a secular dimension which was not particularly, and that was wiped out, it was destroyed. In order to kind of cultivate this sectarian element. Was it done deliberately? Partly so, partly it was a cock-up.
But with the war that happened in 2003 when the US invaded Iraq, when I went to visit, there were many people that would say that the Sunnis and Shia, they intermarry, they're always connected, we didn't have this tension. And then when coming back to London, you see the news that would say mainly that there's sectarian tensions, that the Sunnis and Shias are fighting and whatnot. Is that something you think the governments were playing on and the media had a hand in also?
Well, yes, I certainly would not be surprised. Whether in fact it was something which was really some sort of evil schemers sat around the table and decided we're going to do this, well, I'm not privy to that information, but I think there would be an element of that. But you see, again, divide and rule, you couldn't divide people who were not already potentially divided. There was some sort of element of that. But certainly it's the exacerbation, the radicalization of these divisions is something. I mean, the war on Iraq, I personally, my theory, yes, powerful interest, oil, all that, but I think it was also a personal interest of a personal revenge by George W. Bush. Because Bush is on record having said of Saddam, he's the man who wanted to kill my dad. Because the Americans were convinced it was an attempt on the life of Bush Sr. at some stage, and that Saddam was the agent. I don't believe for a moment, because Saddam was not a fool. He wouldn't have done that, because he would have known what consequences. But Bush, I think he believed it. And incidentally, that if that was true, that would be a key criterion to invalidate the justice of a war, because the just war doctrine, which is very important in Christianity, which many people refer to even in the context of secular politics, but one of the criteria is there should be a right intention to go to war. The intention should not be vengeance, should not be, it should be the redressing of a wrong, the righting of a wrong. It should be justice, not a person, not a desire to take vengeance, because that is not the idea. The idea of vengeance is not a good intention. A good intention is motivated by a desire to establish justice, not to. So if that was really the case, it would cast a really even darker shadow on Bush Jr.
With the tensions in the Middle East now, do you think that ISIS is a Western type of group, or are they just themselves created, well, influenced by Islam, let's say?
Well, ISIS is not quite a section of a CIA or indeed of MI6. I don't think we're quite cranked up by the West. I think it would be, again, it would be naive because they have their own momentum, they have their own ideology, they have their own motivation. I myself, I'm aware of stuff which we read. Certainly the self-proclaimed Khalifa, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, he was a prisoner in an American war camp. So it is not inconceivable that he was recruited. I mean, that is possible. Whether it's likely, I don't know. I have a few doubts. But it's interesting. I have read online that the so-called caliphate, one of their aims, it would be to destroy the Sykes-Picot Agreement. They apparently said this quite officially. Now, well, that sounds like good PR, but in fact the Sykes-Picot Agreement, as I pointed out, was destroyed by the Balfour Declaration, which came out, Sykes-Picot is 1916, Balfour Declaration 1917, and that immediately put a new inserted element in the Middle East, which Sykes-Picot never contemplated. So Sykes-Picot is, in a way, dead as a dodo, and the French and the English quarrelled over the question of who was going. The French who wanted Damascus and also wanted Lebanon. The French were obsessed with the Crusades. They wanted to say, Saladin, we are back. If this is a matter of record. Although France at the time was no longer a Christian power. I mean, France in 1916 was a republic controlled by Freemasons, atheists, and also dubious characters. But still, there was this idea. But coming back to ISIS, certainly it's a very brutal movement. I think that I myself have written about, yes, I mean, these beheadings strike for popular imagination, but they mean to do that. But how many Israeli missiles in Gaza, more than 400 children were killed? Have we seen missiles and bombs, bits of bodies? It must have been a terrible thing to say, but human limbs, heads flying around, it's a horrible thing. But we haven't seen those. I mean, okay, that's done, in a more technological way. What's horrible to see someone with a knife, which is very primitive. But, it's we've seen all sorts of atrocities have happened in Gaza and, in drones in Afghanistan. Obama has been killing more people by drones than his predecessors. And we don't see very often the results of those.
That's true that we don't see them, but because ISIS as a group itself, they are, uploading their own videos and editing and making their own documentaries in a way to show the world what they are capable of. But saying that, why would they be attacking the Middle East itself if they are part of the Middle East and they have this whole Islamic ideology in a way, which many Muslims deny it is, but let's just say it is for now. Why would they be attacking their own people?
Well, you know that that sort of brand of, let's call it Islam for argument's sake, is Wahhabi. It goes back to the teachings of al-Wahhab, who's in a way the theological founder of the Saudi state. And even before that, to Ibn Taymiyyah, very important medieval theologian, but the idea is you can't proclaim even Muslim, non-Muslim, takfir. You do takfir, you say that these Muslims are actually, as a matter of fact, kafirs. And because of that, you can make war of them and you can do all sorts of terrible things on them. So they have this ideology which does not respect the minorities. I mean, Christians have been targeted and killed, churches burned down, and which actually contradicts, because in Islam they're protected. Christians are people of the book, are protected people, and they should not be attacked and killed, or the women kidnapped and raped and sold into slavery and so on. So they had this ideology, which is a brand or Wahhabi theology, and it sort of it kills Christians, Jews, Muslims, Sufis, Kurds, and so on. You know, they chopped off lots of heads of Shia, of Alawis, of Kurds, and that's the sort of nasty people they are.
But just thinking, like, wouldn't they first start off with the Israeli government, meaning that because they are killing their own people, the Palestinians, which they did say in one of their documentaries that they're going to be protecting the Palestinians, why didn't they start off in Israel instead of in Syria and Iraq?
Well, I think the answer is very simple, that Israel is armed to the teeth, and they can't, they would not get anywhere if attacked Israel. The Israelis would certainly have overwhelming firepower, and they would make mincemeat of a caliphate.